Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes the biggest mistake we make is to believe that we can see who someone is just by what they show? It sounds absurd, I know. But what if I told you that a lot of rich, powerful, and wealthy people would give anything to be treated like ordinary people, and that this pursuit can change the fate of a lifetime? This story is not about a cheap fairy tale, nor about a predictable romance where the millionaire finds love and everything turns to magic. No, what you'll see here is brutally real. It's about difficult choices, painful secrets, and the courage to drop everything to truly live. It's about a wealthy Texas heir who pretended to be a simple painter in New York, and about the engineer girl who proved that, sometimes, believing in the invisible transforms the impossible. Sounds crazy, right? A guy who had the world at his feet choose anonymity, loneliness, and uncertainty? But that's where the first big turning point lies. What you have can become your prison if you forget who you are. And the reward for those who risk being authentic? It can come from where you least expect it, like an unpretentious gesture that changes an entire story. If you think you've seen stories of love, overcoming, or changing your life, wait until you dive into it. Because what happened after this millionaire trusted instinct, no one, not even himself, could imagine. Chapter 1: Hidden Loneliness and Fear. When we look outside, it's easy to be fooled by the shiny shell that the world shows. And so was the life of Luke, a wealthy heir to Texas, surrounded by luxury, but completely imprisoned by his own fears. Since the tragic death of his parents, Luke carried a void that neither money, nor applause, nor business contracts could fill. He seemed to have it all: mansions, imported cars, stocks on the market. But inside, he was like an empty castle, beautiful on the outside and echoing the loneliness on the inside walls. And you know, right? No matter how big a house is, if the heart of those who live there is tight, every corner becomes a reminder of what is missing. Now, imagine carrying that feeling every day, waking up with the obligation to run an empire that was never your dream. Luke was a boy who, back then, just wanted to be a painter. Yes, those who dirty their clothes with paint and forget the time because they are immersed in creation. But instead of brushes, they gave him meeting folders. Instead of screens, spreadsheets and more spreadsheets. And he, sunk in grief and pressure, was molding himself to something he never wanted to be, a phenomenon more common than one might think. How many times have you followed a path just because you were expected to do so? And here comes the cruelest detail of this story. The so-called perfect life that people envied was, for Luke, a golden prison. There were days when he looked out the penthouse window and wondered if freedom was still possible. And between us, the fear of disappointing the world is one of the most silent that exists. Do you know someone who, like Luke, stifles his true dreams just to live up to expectations? That's that. If you're that person, maybe it's time to remember that courage is choosing to be true to yourself, even if it scares you. The most curious thing is that, between fancy dinners and gala events, Luke missed the simple things. Do you know that sunset with no time to end? Or a conversation with no obligation to seem interesting? He wanted to be just Luke, not Luke, the heir to Texas. And as strange as it may seem, it was precisely the weight of his last name that prevented him from discovering who he really was. There is a brutal difference between living and just existing, and Luke, until then, only existed. And little did he know that a turnaround awaited him just around the corner. Chapter 2: Escape Trip. There are times when silence speaks louder than any scream. It was at one of these moments that Luke, the heir to Texas, decided he needed to escape. New spreadsheet? Another meeting? None of this mattered anymore. What really mattered was to rediscover his own voice, the one drowned out by well-intentioned advice and the responsibilities inherited along with the title of rich. So, without fanfare, he bought a one-way ticket to New York, carrying in his suitcase only ordinary clothes and an old sketchbook, which he had kept since the time he dreamed of being a painter. For someone who has always been treated as a key piece of an empire, the idea of disappearing seemed crazy. But sometimes, true sanity lies in doing what the heart whispers, even if the whole world points the finger. If you've ever felt this urge to drop everything, no, it's not weakness, it's life trying to save you from yourself. Luke wanted to walk around without being recognized, eat street hot dogs, take the subway route. Banal things, but which for him had the unprecedented flavor of freedom. By the way, If you ever want to feel that same feeling, try spending a weekend in a city where no one knows you. It's therapeutic. Embarkation for New York was not just a geographical change. It was an internal crossing. Every mile away from Texas seemed to erase a little of the image of the tycoon's son and bring out the Luke who wanted to paint dreams and live without protocols. Freedom, however, is a road that takes tolls. Insecurities, fears, and uncertainties were hidden passengers on this trip, sitting right there in the next seat. Because changing scenery is easy, it is really difficult to change your soul. Luke landed in the city that never sleeps with his heart beating like a drum. The lights, the smells, the mix of languages on the sidewalks. New York was everything Texas had never allowed. Chaotic, free, unpredictable. There, no one wanted to know your last name. Only if you walked fast enough not to disturb the flow. And it was in this pulsating scenario that Luke had the first spark of hope that, perhaps, he was beginning to find himself. And little did he know that, in the midst of this hurried crowd, someone special would cross his path. Chapter 3: Unexpected Encounter. If there's one thing life loves to do, it's messing up our plans at the best possible time. In Luke's case, the unforeseen came in the form of Natasha, a determined young engineer he met at a Brooklyn community gallery. She was trying to make sense of an exhibit map, and he, pretending to be a lost tourist, offered to help. In the midst of New York's chaos, Natasha's smile was like a hot coffee on a cold day. Simple, welcoming, and unexpectedly necessary. Nothing about it reminded him of the world Luke came from, and perhaps that's what kept him there. Natasha, raised far from the luxuries of New York and the ranches of Texas, worked hard to establish herself as an engineer in a fierce market. The girl had in her eyes that beautiful courage of someone who has fallen and gotten up more times than she can count. And, even without knowing it, it was this authenticity that won Luke over. He, who had everything to be enchanted only by covers and appearances, found himself hypnotized by the content. Because, at the end of the day, true charm isn't about looks, it's about truth. And Natasha was the embodiment of that. The curious thing is that, at that moment, Luke knew that he could not tell everything about who he was. How to reveal that he was a wealthy heir to Texas, involved in family tragedies and corporate pressures. How to explain that I just wanted to be a simple painter. So, based on instinct, he chose the safest route. He said he was an artist trying to make a living in New York. Simple as that. A small detail omitted so as not to drive away that newly found light. And let's face it, who has never preferred to be judged by who they are, and not by what they have? The conversation flowed like an improvised song. Natasha talked about her childhood, her fears of failing as an engineer, about how she thought New York was a cruel city for those with big dreams and small pockets. And Luke listened, absorbing every word as if it were a life lesson he never had. It was as if, listening to Natasha, he could finally see beyond the blurred mirror of his own existence. Fate, who was already working behind the scenes, was preparing new acts for this story. Chapter 4: Secret Kept. From that day on, Luke dove headlong into this new role, that of painter. He left behind any mention of his title as the wealthy heir to Texas and dedicated himself to building a common image, as common as possible amid the glitz of New York. He painted simple pictures, made portraits for tourists in Central Park, and every stroke was a silent manifesto against the life he had left. It was ironic. He only felt whole when he hid who he really was. Hiding the truth, however, is like trying to hold water in your hands. With every conversation, every gesture, Luke felt the weight of the secret increasing. But there was something liberating too. For the first time in a long time, someone liked him without expecting anything in return. Natasha talked to him about his engineering projects as if they were possible dreams, not cold negotiations in boardrooms. She believed in hard work, in genuine talent, in honest effort, things that Luke had almost forgotten existed. In moments like these, we realize that love, friendship, and true connection are born from vulnerability, not ostentation. And, paradoxically, Luke found more authenticity living as a false painter than he had ever felt as a legitimate heir. It was as if, by hiding his story, he could finally show his soul. Perhaps that's why, to this day, the deepest relationships begin when we lower our defenses and show our most imperfect selves. Still, the shadow of secrecy grew. The more Natasha opened up, the more Luke felt like he was walking on thin ice. Trust is a fragile little plant. Once stepped on, it may not sprout again. And he knew that, sooner or later, the moment of truth would come. But, like any good reluctant protagonist, he chose to postpone the inevitable, surrendering to the sweet illusion of that beginning of happiness. Chapter 5: Dreams and Fears. What unites two people, many times, are not successes, but fears. Luke discovered this one afternoon when Natasha, sitting in a simple cafe in Queens, vented about her insecurities. Despite being a trained engineer, she struggled to find space in a market dominated by big names. The fear of failure, rejection, loneliness, all of this came out of her in sincere waves. And for the first time in a long time, Luke felt he wasn't the only one carrying invisible scars. They were not the engineer and the painter. They were just two dreamers trying to survive in New York. Natasha spoke with that kind of honesty that breaks down walls. He told how sometimes he thought about giving up and returning to the countryside, where success was not measured by achievements, but by sincere smiles. And Luke, hearing everything, understood exactly what she felt. Because, deep down, he was also afraid of never breaking free from the expectations of Texas, afraid of being just another unhappy heir. Different fears, but so similar in essence that it was impossible not to connect. The most beautiful thing about all this, by opening up to each other, they built a solid bridge made of truth and complicity. A bridge that, at some point, would have to bear the weight of the revelations that Luke hid. But for now, they only existed in that safe space, where it was allowed to dream without shame. If you've ever had someone with whom you could share your fears without fear of judgment, you know how rare it is. It's like finding water in the middle of the desert. And it was at that moment, between confessions and cheap coffees, that Luke felt he wasn't just running away from something. He was running towards something much bigger. Natasha, without even realizing it, rekindled in him the flame of courage that seemed extinguished since the death of his parents. And little did he know that, in the most difficult test she would face, he would be the one who would need to reach out. Because it is easy to say that you believe in others. It's really hard to prove it when everything goes wrong. Chapter 6: Mutual Support. Life, capricious as ever, did not take long to test this newly formed connection. Natasha, determined to win on her own merit, applied for a place in a major urban revitalization project. It was a golden chance for any young engineer in New York. But when the result came out, the frustration fell like a bucket of cold water. She had not been chosen, not for lack of talent, but because, as often happens, the game was more political than technical. Luke saw in her eyes the pain of someone who tried his best and still wasn't enough, or at least he thought it wasn't. And that's when he did what every true friend should do. He sat next to her, without haste, without ready-made phrases. He just stayed there, present. Sometimes, the greatest show of support comes not with grandiose speeches, but with the comfortable silence of those who do not abandon you at the bottom of the well. If you know someone who is going through a defeat, remember, presence is more powerful than any advice. Over time, Natasha began to get back on her feet. And, in the process, it also strengthened Luke. Because supporting someone in their moments of fall creates a mutual strength, an invisible alliance that sustains both sides. It's like the saying goes, when we help lift someone up, we also lift ourselves up. They were building something that no money could buy: trust. And for Luke, who has always seen self-interested relationships around his fortune, it was like breathing fresh air after years in closed rooms. Of course, Luke's secret was still there, hanging like a heavy cloud. But at that moment, he decided that Natasha deserved to be truly loved, even if the truth was still in store. And in her heart, the idea of doing something for her began to germinate. Something that could repay all the good she sowed without even realizing it. Little did Natasha know that, as she tried to get back on her feet, she was inspiring the greatest gesture of gratitude Luke could offer. Chapter 7: An Unexpected Gesture. Anyone who has believed in someone when no one else did knows the strength it has. Natasha, with her quiet faith, gave Luke a vote of confidence, and he couldn't stand by in the face of it. In secret, she gathered what little she had saved and, without saying anything, entered one of Luke's paintings into an art competition in New York. A respected event, but one that few street artists had the courage to participate in. Natasha didn't just see talent in her painter friend, saw the potential to change destinies. When Luke heard about the inscription, by chance, when he found the lost receipt in her apartment, he was speechless. Who does this kind of thing for someone these days? To risk the little you have for believing in another? If you're reading this and think that gestures like this are rare, you're right. But they still exist. And it is these little follies of faith that transform lives. Like planting a seed without knowing if it will rain, and still planting, trusting in the best. Overcome by a mixture of fear and gratitude, Luke agreed to participate in the contest. Every brush stroke in the frame was loaded with emotions he didn't even know he had yet. He painted not only the scene he proposed, but all his way there. The pain of Texas, the longing for his parents, the discovery of a sincere friendship in New York. It was as if every color, every stroke, was a piece of his soul being set free. And, for the first time, he painted without masks. The day of the contest has arrived, and, with it, the butterflies in the stomach of those who have something to lose. Luke, who had always lived surrounded by financial guarantees, now faced the real risk, that of being seen for real. Natasha, as always, was there, smiling, believing, even without promising happy endings. And the truth is that, at that moment, they had already won something much bigger than any award. But there were still surprises in store for that day. Chapter 8, Victory and Revelations. In the middle of that illuminated gallery, with the paintings lined up and critical eyes on all sides, the improbable happened. Luke won. That simple painter from New York surpassed renowned artists and was applauded by critics. For a few minutes, he savored the taste of the purest victory, the one won by talent, not by last name, nor by the Texas bank account. And it was there, under the spotlight, that he made the most important decision of his life, to reveal who he really was. Taking the microphone, Luke told his true story. He talked about being the heir to a fortune, about the death of his parents, about the desperate flight to find meaning in art. The hall was absolutely silent. Natasha, in the middle of the audience, looked at him with an expression that was difficult to decipher. Was it fear? Disappointment? Surprise? But most of all, it was pride. Because, at that moment, Luke was no longer just another pretty face lost in the crowd. He was becoming a whole man. Luke made a point of publicly thanking Natasha. He said that without her stubborn faith and her unpretentious gesture, he would never have had the courage to present himself to the world. Sometimes life just needs a person who says, "I believe in you." And that's what Natasha did. If you want to change someone's life, you don't need much. Sometimes, you just have to believe, even when the world itself calls it crazy. With his heart open and his masks fallen, Luke looked at Natasha and knew he couldn't live halfway anymore. There, in that hall, two worlds collided, that of inherited fortune and that of conquered dreams, to create something new. But there was still one last piece to complete this puzzle. The construction of a life that was truly theirs, and not a repetition of the mistakes of the past. Chapter 9, New Beginning. The money that once seemed like a curse would now be a tool to make dreams come true, not only his, but also hers. Luke decided to sell his shares in the Texas company. He donated a generous part of his fortune to renovate an old theater in New York, about to be demolished. But on one condition, that Natasha be the chief engineer of the project. A way to unite her passion for art with her dedication to engineering. A gift for the city, and, even more, for both of them. The decision sent shockwaves through Texas business circles, of course. How does an heir renounce an empire to become a painter and invest in a decadent theater? But Luke didn't care anymore. For the first time, his life had an owner, himself. If you think you need the approval of others to be happy, think again. True happiness comes from being true to what you believe, even if the world calls it crazy. While Natasha coordinated the works, Luke continued painting. Now no longer on the streets, but in independent exhibitions and small studios in New York. They learned to build a life together, brick by brick, brush stroke by stroke. It was imperfect, it was challenging, but it was real, and that made all the difference. Because, in the end, success is not having everything. It's having what makes sense to you. And so, where many saw only ruins and losses, they saw a new beginning, like a blank canvas waiting for the first colors. Because, at the end of the day, That's what life is about. Having the courage to start over as many times as it takes. Conclusion. Now tell me, how long will you keep hiding who you really are just to please others? How many incredible opportunities have you let slip because you were afraid to show your essence? Luke and Natasha's story proves that life rewards courage, not perfection. The courage to be authentic, to believe in yourself when no one else does, to start over as many times as necessary. What about you? Are you ready to let go of what holds you back to live what really matters? Are you willing to take the risk of being who you were born to be, even if it scares, confuses, or even bothers those around you? Because, in the end, those who choose to live to please the world end up becoming prisoners of it. If this story touched something inside you, it's because, deep down, you already know the answer. Now it's up to you. Will you just continue to exist, or will you finally start living? Comment below. What was the part of the story that moved you the most? I really want to know. And of course, if you want to keep learning, growing, and being inspired by transformative stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Come and be part of this journey of courage and truth. See you in the next video.